Greetings collectors and welcome to today's retro game review. There's been a murder at Blackwell Grange and you're invited to join me to find out who did it, in which room and with which weapon. Yes, of course, it's Cluedo, or Clue as our friends in the US call it, for the PC. Now before I continue, I'll just clear up a few things around the naming conventions on this one. This episode is going to focus primarily on the 2001 PC edition of the game, rather than the long history of the board game itself. Having said that though, I think that it is important that I set the scene. If nothing else other than to stop the hundreds of comments of why I'm pronouncing certain weapons or suspects' names in a way that you might not be used to. As a brief history, the game was devised by Anthony E. Pratt during World War II under the draft version initially named Murder, which actually has a good ring to it if you ask me. After the war, Waddington's picked up the publishing rights and renamed the game Cluedo, a combination of the words clue and ludo. Ludo being the Latin for I play. Here in the UK, it was common to use the word ludo for a dice rolling game. Typically, this is the version of Ludo I think of as it's the variant I used to play as a child. See, we are still cultured enough to use the Latin over here. So, Clue plus Ludo and you get Cluedo, a game with clues and rolls of dice. Cluedo was later licensed to Parker Brothers for publication in the USA. Parker Brothers felt that simplifying the name to Clue and making other small tweaks was in the best interests of the US market. By the 1950s, the Clue that most Americans recognise today had emerged. Along with the name change of the game, expect to see a few other minor differences between the regions. Here in the UK, the murder victim is called Dr. Black, but Mr. Boddy in the US edition. Miss Scarlet is spelt with a single T in Clue, and is called Miss Scarlet with a double T in Cluedo. There is still some debate over this, but if you ask most British people, Scarlet with the double T is mainly used for people's names, for example Scarlett Johansson. Scarlet spelt with the single T refers to the colour of deep red called scarlet, as in the Scarlet Witch. In this sense, it actually makes the international version of Cluedo a little bit out of step. Whilst all characters are named after colours, you will find certain prints of the British edition with Scarlet with a double T, which technically is not the preferred spelling if you are referring to the colour. Either way, just an interesting quirk of design I guess. Finally, in the US this weapon is called a wrench. In Cluedo you will hear this referred to as a spanner. This is just good old fashioned UK versus US English terminology though. Technically speaking, a spanner is a type of wrench, but we could discuss this all day. Perhaps the most notable difference in naming convention is with Mr. Green. In the international version of Cluedo, Mr. Green's original name is the Reverend Green, and it's still retained to this day. You can even still see the collar on his profile card. It's worth noting that whilst the board has largely been left unchanged over the years, the weapons themselves have had several iterations. My mother's 1950s set has a really good sharp knife and real rope, whilst mine, well, it has a plastic rope and the dullest knife you've ever seen. I preferred the world before health and safety was a thing. With all that said, the games actually play the same in all territories, although most families will create their own house rules for some aspects of the game. Anyway, on with the game. This is the 2001 PC edition of Cluedo, Murder at Blackwell Grange. I picked this one up for the princely sum of 75 British pence. That's about $1 for the US audience. An altogether excellent price for what you get here. The packaging is very much a no-frills DVD case, but Infogrames did a really nice job here. The design is nicely executed, and the back of the box tells you everything you'd want to know about the game. This includes the PC specs. Hold on to your hats, because you're going to need Windows 95 or 98. Although I'm actually running this on a Windows 7 machine without any issues. A Pentium 133MHz, 16MB of RAM. You may also want to really go all out with 1MB RAM graphics cards, a sound card and 40MB of hard disk space. If you have a 28800 band modem, why not hit the information superhighway and sleuth your way to victory with other detectives around the world. Just for fun, I thought I'd show you the install process on this one. First up, select either the US or UK version of English that best suits you. This will put all the standard localised naming conventions in place, which is a nice touch because language and terminology are one of those things that can really break an experience. I'm sure that whether you speak UK, US, Australian, Canadian, or any other version of English, some words can be really jarring to the ear if you're not used to them. Things like the word faucet in US English rather than the word tap get me every time. Similarly, us Brits say all kinds of weird and wonderful things that we don't understand even between our own counties. And I wouldn't have it any other way, that's the fun of sharing an international language. Anyway, pick your favourite and on to step 2. The install option, A, B or C. So, do you want to eat up 15, 25 or a whopping 91 megabytes of your hard drive? In this day and age, it really doesn't matter too much. This will simply determine how many files the game disk will copy over to your hard drive. Back in the day, this might have had a benefit of increased loading speeds, but now it's just a nice relic of install history to reminisce over. Choose an appropriate folder and then 3, 2, 1, cool, we're done. This is a bit different to that monster phantasmagoria experience I had to get through some time ago. From here on in, it gets very murderous indeed. The intro video is a resolution of 320 by 240 pixels, so expect a whole ton of pixelation. I'm really fond of this introduction though, it just brings back so many memories of when having a CD-ROM drive was the must-have accessory for your PC. It's a competently rendered beginning to our evening and really sets the tone if you're having a murder-themed night of fun with friends. Remember that selection we made at the install stage? You will either get the Clue or Cluedo introduction, which shows a nice level of attention to detail from the developer. Now, before you begin, I would suggest having a quick breeze through the preferences. In particular, I would turn on the Auto Notes option. It will just save you a bit of clicking later on during the game. You may also want to turn the music levels down just a bit, but be sure to keep the butler's narration on because his voice really makes this game what it is in my opinion. From here, select either a local game or you can choose to network. Not surprisingly, I couldn't find any other players out there, so local it is. Now it's a case of setting up your game. You must have a minimum of 3 players in total, and these can be allocated as either human or computer. The options allow you to set up the computer players as novice, normal or expert. This will adjust the difficulty as the players will make better notes to enable them to deduce solutions faster on the expert setting. Now, here's where the game lets you customise the experience further with a classic mode or a no die roll option. In the classic edition, you will be rolling a single die and be able to move the corresponding 1 to 6 squares at a time. However, the no die roll option allows every player to move 9 squares each turn. This breaks with the classic formula, but I actually preferred this option because let's face it, rolling virtual dice is never going to be the highlight of the experience. Cue the next nifty animation and the ghostly hands of fate deal out your weapon, room and suspect cards. Again, this didn't have to be in there, but it really helps set the tone of the experience. From here on in, it's pure Cluedo, and some rather smooth jazz. The aim of the game is unchanged from the board game, and that's to be able to deduce who the murderer is, in which room it took place, and with which weapon. It's first best to check the cards you were dealt at the beginning of the game. Here I have a couple of rooms, the spanner, lead pipe, revolver, and Mrs. White. I therefore know that these can be eliminated from my inquiries. Over to the detective's card, and I can see that these have already been highlighted and colour-coded. However, I can add extra circles, ticks or crosses in by each element as I investigate and ultimately make an accusation. Now, the isometric view can be a little jarring at first, even if you know the layout of the mansion, so you may want to click the overhead view to get your bearings. To move, you can then click the die and indicate where you'd like to move. Each player takes their turn. So here, Miss Scarlet suggests Mrs. White with the spanner in the lounge.
Reverend Green can disprove the suggestion.
I now know that the Reverend Green has at least one of these cards. As luck would have it, I happen to know that it must be the lounge, as I have Mrs. White and the spanner in my collection, so this was actually a very good opening round for me to observe. Notice how it wasn't myself that made the suggestion, yet I can still learn from the other players. Since the Reverend Green then accuses Mrs. White, I must show what I know about the accusation. Now I'm going to head over to the hall and make some suggestions of my own via the light bulb icon. I'm holding Mrs. White and the revolver in my hand, so this is a clear-cut chance to find out if anyone is holding the hall card.
Miss Scarlet cannot disprove the suggestion. Reverend Green can disprove the suggestion.
As it happens, the Reverend Green can show me that he does have the hall card, so I can now happily eliminate it from my investigation. By the same token, Miss Scarlet, if she was watching, knows that the Reverend Green must hold either Mrs. White, the hall, or the revolver. So, fast forward a bit and Miss Scarlet suggests herself with the spanner in the dining room.
Reverend Green can disprove the suggestion.
From this, I know that the Reverend Green must hold either the Miss Scarlet card or the dining room, since I know I have the spanner. I'll mark this one up with a circle, which I'm using as a code for may have. If I can make a tactical suggestion later, I may be able to deduce which one it was if Miss Scarlet shows me one of the two cards. Or it may be that Reverend Green has both himself. As long as you have a system though, you will get to an answer. As you might expect, the game continues and gets even more intriguing. Make notes, deduce the possible outcomes, tactically move players to a room by accusing them, and use the secret passages. In essence, this is classic Cluedo. You will get to a state where you can deduce that certain characters don't hold certain cards, and can therefore adapt your questioning towards them strategically. I would need a whole other episode on Cluedo strategy to explain this all fully. Be rest assured though that what works on paper works well here. Another thing that works well is the background music. The old-timey jazz keeps the game on theme and just really sets the tone as the suspects pace around the mansion. Each room also has its own detailed sound effects, which again isn't overstated, but subtle enough to make the house feel like a real setting. Add into this the creepy butler narrating the events, and you have yourself a very pleasing experience. Is it perfect? No, but it's definitely true to the Cluedo experience in most respects. I do have to say that when playing the physical game, I record my deductions a little differently to that of the PC edition. I tend to divide up the pad for how many players there are. This then lets me either fill in with a yes, no or maybe, and is by far the clearer recording method, at least in my mind. Say for example, I suspected that either of my opponents could have the candlestick. In the PC game, I can only mark one specific colour for each item. Whilst on a physical pad, I can put a question mark against each player individually, which is clearer at a glance. It's not a deal breaker, but I happen to know that this is quite a well-known methodology for Cluedo players, so was surprised not to see it as an option in there. This is just a small gripe, and it won't ruin the fun of the gameplay. Inevitably, one of the players will make an accusation, the murder solution is revealed, and someone goes away for a long time in a grey prison cell.
Miss Scarlet has accused correctly.
Overall, I would definitely recommend this version of Cluedo to gamers that enjoy the board game. In my opinion, it is close enough to the physical experience for gamers to slot straight in there and start having fun. It certainly doesn't replace it as an experience, but it does offer a few decent hours of fun. There have been any number of physical game variants, video game editions, TV adaptations, and of course one of the best movies of all time based on this classic board game. It may only be 640 by 480 in resolution and some rather dated CGI interludes, but the format of the game and execution really sees this one through to being an enjoyable experience. For the bargain bin price that you can pick this one up for, it really would be a crime to not give this one a go. Until next time, good luck with the detective work and happy gaming. Hello again, I hope you enjoyed today's show and thank you for the view. Remember, you can always comment, like, subscribe and find us on the social media sites below. Happy collecting!